Hi. I was asked to make a video on the topic of the collective unconscious, so this will be my attempt at that. So the collective unconscious is a Carl Jung term, and what is meant by collective unconscious is that just as every individual has their own individual unconscious, really humanity as a whole shares an unconscious. What does that mean? So it basically means that we're all kind of born embedded with this information that's kind of stored within us from birth in our psyche, just as one cell in the body holds the genes of all of our ancestors before us, so does the human psyche, the individual human psyche, hold all the information of previous generations. And what that means is that the way he explains it is that there's the structure is one of archetypes, meaning how does this information sit within us? So it's in a very kind of archaic way. It's not organized, it's not structured, it's kind of fantastical. And one thing that's interesting to know is that it's believed that in more ancient times people used a much more fantastical way of thinking, and that the way we think today, which is like, it's called what we use today partially because we still use the ancient version, but the modern kind of cognition that developed with time is what we call directive thinking. So that is basically a form of thinking that is structured, it's directed towards something. There's kind of a framework to it. It can therefore develop things in the world, like technology. But part of the human psyche, even today, but in previous generations it was much stronger, is what they call in psychology, I think Carl Jung coined this term, I'm not sure, but he calls it fantasy thinking or magical thinking. And what is meant by that is that if you don't really think in a directive way and you just kind of kind of let yourself loose, what's going to happen is your thinking patterns are going to become very associative. They're just gonna, like, you're just gonna be thinking thoughts. It's gonna be kind of like a daydream, and a daydream doesn't have a structure. It's just kind of things that pop up from within us, all kinds of desires and needs and motivations and images and visions that kind of create almost like a dream. Dreams are one of the ways in which this sort of non-directive thinking, this fantastical thinking, manifest. So in previous generations, it was much more like people used to think like that, and therefore if someone had sort of what today we would call a fantasy, in previous generations it was like reality. But we shouldn't think that it was in any way kind of that we are smarter today, because the directive thinking they had wasn't like an inferior sort. It wasn't like a childish kind of thinking. It was just kind of a different form. So I think a good example is if you look, for example, the Bible is full of metaphors and symbols, and it's basically like one big poetry, especially books like the book of Isaiah, the prophets. They're very poetic and in a very high level way. They have incredible symbols and metaphors that today people would struggle creating, and you can see that it's just kind of like that kind of thinking was just much more natural for people. They used to kind of speak in this way, and so all this kind of thinking that has to do with a more fantastical side is prompted from within, from images stored within us. And again, going back, I kind of went on a tangent. Carl Jung speaks of archetypes. What are these archetypes? It could be things like, some of the ones he mentions are the archetype of the mother, the father, the wise old man, the hero, the shadow, the trickster. All kinds of like motifs and themes that we know today that kind of run through the generations. They're just running through the psyche of humanity, right? Everybody wants to be the hero, or the maiden that is saved by the hero, or things like that. So the reason people have these kind of desires, as you can see that mostly in children, but even as we grow up, it kind of maybe kind of manifests in a more adult way, but it's still like inherently they basically stay the same. And this is because it's things that come from within. There's no real, like, it's not something from the outside that is telling us to pursue these kinds of things. And that's because they probably have a spark of truth in them. There's probably, if they're kind of cleansed and from the more archaic things, and they're kind of, we look for their root, then we can understand why we seek them, right? For example, the idea of the maiden, that's because that has kind of an association of purity and innocence, and this is something that human beings kind of look to pursue. So these are kind of examples of archetypes that he speaks about, and I think it's a pretty interesting topic, and that's basically it. If you have anything to say, you're welcome to add it in the comments.